Marcus Chen never believed in fairy tales until he found two dying dragons in his scrapyard at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. What he discovered when he saved their lives would shake the foundations of human understanding about the universe itself. For these weren't just any dragons, they were the last guardians of a secret so profound that entire civilizations had risen and fallen to protect it. A secret that would make humanity the most feared species in the galaxy, if they could survive long enough to claim it. The oil-stained mechanic who fixed broken hovercars for a living was about to become the key to humanity's greatest triumph or its final extinction. Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, the familiar smell of engine oil and metal filling his nostrils as he looked around his cluttered repair shop. The hovercar he'd been working on for the past 3 days sat silent in the corner, its anti-gravity drive finally purring like a content cat. Outside, the neon lights of Neo-Singapore cast rainbow reflections on the wet streets, and the distant hum of traffic filled the air with its constant melody. At 42 years old, Marcus had spent most of his life with his hands buried deep in machinery. His father had been a mechanic before him, and his grandfather before that. It was honest work, fixing the broken things that kept civilization moving. Hovercars, industrial lifters, atmospheric processors. If it had moving parts and ran on fusion or quantum energy, Marcus could probably fix it. The workshop was his sanctuary, filled with tools that had been passed down through 3 generations of Chen mechanics. Ancient plasma cutters hung next to modern molecular welders, and spare parts from a dozen different manufacturers cluttered every available surface. The smell of coolant and lubricants had soaked into the concrete walls over decades, creating an atmosphere that felt more like home to Marcus than his small apartment upstairs. He was just locking up for the night when he heard the sound. It started as a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once, shaking the windows and making the tools rattle on their hooks. Marcus frowned, looking up at the ceiling. It couldn't be thunder. The weather forecast had called for clear skies, but the sound grew louder, deeper, until it felt like the earth itself was groaning. Through the workshop's large windows, Marcus saw something impossible streak across the night sky. 2 massive shapes, dark against the stars, moving far too fast to be any aircraft he knew. They were huge, easily the size of cargo haulers, but they moved with an organic grace that no machine could match. As he watched in stunned silence, both shapes suddenly lurched, their flight paths becoming erratic. They were falling. Marcus ran outside, his heart pounding as he watched the 2 objects crash into the scrapyard behind his shop. The impact shook the ground beneath his feet, and a pillar of steam and smoke rose from the crash site. For a moment, everything was silent except for the distant sounds of the city. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold, breathing. Deep, labored breathing that sounded like air moving through caverns. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from his tool belt and cautiously made his way through the maze of stacked hovercar frames and discarded engine parts that filled his scrapyard. The smell hit him first, something like ozone and burning metal, but underneath it was something else, something alive and warm and unmistakably alien. He found them in a crater at the center of the scrapyard, surrounded by twisted metal and scattered debris. 2 creatures unlike anything he had ever seen, even in the wildest science fiction Hollywoodies. They were enormous, each one easily 20 meters long from nose to tail, with scales that seemed to shift between deep purple and midnight black in the flashlight's beam. Their wings, torn and bleeding, were folded against bodies that rose and fell with each painful breath. Dragons. Real living dragons. Marcus stood frozen at the edge of the crater, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Dragons were supposed to be myths. Stories told to children about magical creatures from humanity's distant past. They certainly weren't supposed to crash land in scrapyards in Neo-Singapore in the year 2387. But there they were, and they were dying. The smaller of the 2 dragons, though smaller was relative when talking about creatures the size of subway cars, lifted its massive head and looked directly at him. Its eyes were the color of molten gold, ancient and intelligent and filled with pain. When it spoke, its voice was like distant thunder rumbling through Marcus's chest as much as his ears. "Help us," it said in perfect, if accented standard Terran. "Please." Marcus felt his knees go weak. Not only were dragons real, but they could talk. They were intelligent, sapient beings, and they were asking for his help. He looked at the wounds covering both creatures, deep gashes that oozed a luminescent blue fluid, burned patches where their scales had been seared away, and what looked like blast damage from energy weapons. Someone had shot them down. "I'm just a mechanic," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know anything about helping. Dragon anatomy is surprisingly similar to that of large terrestrial mammals," the wounded creature said, its golden eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "We heal quickly if our wounds are properly cleaned and sealed, but we lack the tools and our strength fades." The second dragon, slightly larger and with scales that seemed to hold more purple in their depths, stirred weakly. "Zara," it said, its voice even deeper than the first. "We should not, the protocols." "The protocols be damned, Kai," the first dragon Zara replied. "We're dying and this human offers aid. Sometimes honor must bow to necessity." Marcus looked between the two massive creatures, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to run, to call the authorities, to let someone else deal with this impossible situation. But the mechanic in him, the part that had spent decades fixing broken things, wouldn't let him walk away from something that needed help. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Relief flickered across Zara's massive features. "First, we need to stop the bleeding. Your fusion cutting tools. They can be adjusted to cauterize wounds without causing further damage. Then we need somewhere safe to rest while we recover." "And after that?" The two dragons exchanged a look that seemed to carry years of shared understanding. It was Kai who answered, his voice heavy with what might have been sadness. "After that, human, your world will never be the same." Marcus spent the next 6 hours working by the light of portable flood lamps, carefully sealing wounds and cleaning injuries that wept blue luminescence onto the scrap metal around them. The dragons bore his ministrations with stoic patience, though he could see the pain in their ancient eyes. Their blood, if that's what the glowing blue fluid was, had properties he'd never encountered. It seemed to conduct energy, glowing brighter when it came into contact with electrical fields. As he worked, Marcus learned that Zara and Kai were twins, though they looked nothing alike beyond their basic dragon anatomy. Zara was leaner, built for speed, with scales that shimmered between purple and black like oil on water. Kai was broader, more heavily muscled, with scales that held deeper purple hues shot through with veins of silver. Both carried scars that spoke of long lives filled with conflict. "How long have you been on Earth?" Marcus asked as he sealed a particularly nasty gash along Zara's left wing. "We have not been on Earth," Zara replied. "We came here tonight fleeing from pursuers." "You're aliens?" "In a sense, though the reality is more complex than that term suggests." Marcus paused in his work. "More complex how?" Another meaningful look passed between the twins. It was Kai who spoke this time. "Tell me, Marcus Chen, for we know your name from the signs on your establishment, what do you know of your species' history?" "Human history? The basics, I suppose." "We evolved on Earth, developed technology, spread to the stars, built the Terran Federation. We've been a spacefaring civilization for about 400 years now." "And before that?" Marcus shrugged. "Stone Age, Bronze Age, Industrial Age, Information Age, Fusion Age. Pretty standard evolutionary progression, according to the xenobiologists." Zara made a sound that might have been laughter, if laughter could sound like distant thunder. "Oh, Marcus Chen, if only it were that simple." As dawn broke over Neo-Singapore, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus finished his work on the dragon's injuries. They were stable, their bleeding stopped, and their wounds sealed, but it was clear they needed time to heal. The problem was that two 20-meter dragons couldn't exactly hide in his workshop. "The old warehouse," Marcus said, thinking out loud, 3 blocks from here. "It's been abandoned for years, and it's big enough." "You would shelter us?" Kai asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Even knowing nothing about us, about what we are or why we're here?" "You asked for help," Marcus replied simply. "I don't know much about dragons, but I know when something's hurt and needs fixing." That's what I do. Moving the dragons proved to be a logistical nightmare. Even with their injuries, they could still fly short distances, but not in broad daylight where they might be seen. Marcus had to wait until nightfall, then guide them through the maze of back alleys and industrial corridors that connected his scrapyard to the abandoned warehouse. The building had once housed atmospheric processing equipment for the city's climate control system, but advances in technology had made it obsolete decades ago. It was perfect for their needs, large enough for 2 dragons, isolated enough to avoid casual observation, and structurally sound enough to serve as a temporary refuge. As Marcus helped them settle into their new hiding place, bringing them medical supplies and food, though he had no idea what dragons ate, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn towards something vast and dangerous. "Why were you being pursued?" he asked as he checked Zara's bandages. The twins exchanged another of their meaningful looks. Finally, Zara sighed, a sound like wind through caverns, "because we carry something that certain parties would prefer to remain hidden. A truth about your species that has been suppressed for millennia." "What kind of truth?" "The kind that could make humanity the most powerful force in the galaxy," Kai said quietly, "or the kind that could see your species hunted to extinction by every other intelligent race among the stars." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "That sounds like something I should know about." "Yes," Zara agreed. "It is. But first, you must understand that by helping us, you have already crossed a line. There are forces in this galaxy that will stop at nothing to keep this secret buried. By sheltering us, by learning what we know, you put yourself and your entire species at risk. And if I walk away now, then we die. The secret dies with us, and humanity continues on its current path, unaware of both its true potential and the dangers that surround it." Marcus looked at the 2 massive creatures, these impossible beings that had crashed into his ordinary life and turned everything upside down. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been whether he could fix Mrs. Patterson's hover car before her daughter's wedding. Now he was being asked to make a choice that could affect the future of the entire human race. "Tell me," he said. Zara smiled, an expression that on a dragon's face was both beautiful and terrifying. "Very well, Marcus Chen, but first you must promise us something." "What?" "That no matter what we tell you, no matter how impossible it sounds, you will hear us out completely before you decide whether to believe us." Marcus nodded slowly. "I promise." "Then listen well," Kai said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "For the story we're about to tell you begins long ago, in a time before your recorded history, when humanity was not alone on Earth. Outside the warehouse, the city of Neo-Singapore hummed with its usual activity. Millions of people went about their daily lives, unaware that in an abandoned building in the industrial district, a conversation was about to begin that would change the course of human civilization forever. Marcus Chen, grease-stained mechanic and fixer of broken things, was about to learn that some secrets were worth dying for, and that humanity's greatest strength might also be its greatest weakness. The abandoned warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of the city beyond its walls. Marcus sat on an overturned crate, looking up at the 2 massive dragons who had just promised to tell him a truth that could reshape humanity's understanding of itself. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Zara shifted slightly, her scales catching the filtered light that streamed through the grimy windows. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of millennia. "Your species has a saying, 'The truth will set you free.' But sometimes, Marcus Chen, the truth can also imprison those who hear it." 65 million years ago?" Kai began, his deeper voice creating harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. "A great catastrophe befell your world. You call it the extinction event that ended the age of dinosaurs. What your scientists do not know is that this was no natural disaster." Marcus leaned forward, his engineer's mind already working. "You're saying it was artificial? That something caused it deliberately?" "Not something," Zara corrected. "Someone. A species that your kind will one day know is the hegemene, though they called themselves the architects then. They had watched your world for millions of years, studying the great reptiles that ruled it, learning their secrets. Dragons weren't myths, Marcus, Kai continued. We were the dominant sapient species on your planet. We had built cities that floated among the clouds, had mastered the manipulation of matter at the quantum level, had even begun to touch the edges of what you might call magic. Marcus felt his worldview cracking like glass under pressure. That's impossible. We've studied fossil records, geological layers. There's no evidence of any advanced civilization. Because the architects made sure there wouldn't be, Zara said, pain evident in her golden eyes. They didn't just want to destroy us, they wanted to erase us completely. Every city, every artifact, every trace of our existence was systematically obliterated and then buried under artificial geological layers. What you think you know about your planet's history has been carefully crafted to hide the truth. But why? Why would they do that? The twins exchanged another of their meaningful looks. It was becoming clear to Marcus that they shared some form of telepathic connection, able to communicate thoughts and emotions without words. Finally, Kai spoke, because they discovered something about our species that terrified them beyond measure. Dragons, you see, have a unique relationship with what you might call the fundamental forces of reality. We can manipulate energy in ways that most species cannot even comprehend. But more than that, we can teach these abilities to other species. Teaching dragons were always our greatest gift and our greatest curse, Zara added. We could take a primitive species and, given time and proper instruction, help them transcend their physical limitations. We could awaken latent abilities that lay dormant in their genetic code. Marcus felt a chill creep up his spine. You're talking about humans, aren't you? Humanity was not the only intelligent species on Earth during the time of dragons, Kai said. There were others, early primates, evolved cetaceans, even certain cephalopod species that had developed tool use and language. But humans were special. Special how? Zara leaned closer and Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from her massive form. Your species has something that we had never encountered before. A genetic quirk, a mutation that makes you uniquely compatible with the abilities we could teach. Other species could learn our arts to a limited degree. Humans could potentially master them completely. And the architects found out. They had been watching Earth for millions of years, studying the various species, cataloging threats and opportunities. When they realized what we were teaching your ancestors, when they saw the potential that lay dormant in human genetics, they decided that both our species posed too great a threat to their dominance. Marcus stood up and began pacing, his mind reeling. So they killed the dragons and wiped out the evidence. But some humans survived. More than survived, Kai said. The architect's cleansing was incomplete. Some dragons escaped off-world before the great catastrophe. And some humans retained the knowledge we had given them, passing it down through generations as mythology, folklore, and legend. The stories of magic in your early civilizations weren't fantasies, Zara explained. They were racial memories of abilities that your ancestors actually possessed. The tales of wizards and sorcerers, of humans who could manipulate the elements and bend reality to their will, these were based on truth. But if that's real, why can't we do those things now? Because the architects didn't just settle for genocide, Kai said, his voice heavy with ancient anger. They spent the next several thousand years hunting down any human who showed signs of manifesting these abilities. They infiltrated your early civilizations, posed as gods and demons, and systematically bred the active genes out of your population. The abilities are still there, dormant in every human genome, Zara added. But the knowledge of how to awaken them was lost. The architects made sure of that. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face the dragons. Until now. Until now, Zara confirmed. Kai and I are among the last of our kind who remember the old ways. We carry the knowledge of how to awaken the abilities that sleep in human DNA. And someone found out that you're here. The hegemony, the descendants of the architects, have been searching for us for centuries. They know that if humanity ever regains its lost abilities, it could pose an existential threat to their galactic empire. Your species' creativity, adaptability, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitations makes you dangerous enough already. Add the powers that dragons once taught your ancestors, Marcus sank back down onto his makeshift seat, overwhelmed. We'd be unstoppable. Perhaps you would destroy yourselves. Power without wisdom has led to the downfall of many species. Kai studied Marcus with those ancient golden eyes. But that choice should be yours to make, not theirs. For several minutes, the warehouse was quiet except for the sound of Marcus's breathing and the distant rumble of the city. Finally, he looked up at the two dragons. "Show me." "Show you what?" "Show me that this isn't all some elaborate hallucination. Show me that humans really can do whatever it is you're talking about." Zara tilted her massive head, considering. "The awakening process is dangerous, Marcus. It requires a melding of minds, a sharing of consciousness that most beings find overwhelming. And once begun, it cannot be undone. You would see the universe as dragons see it, with all the beauty and terror that entails. "And if something goes wrong, then you die," Kai said bluntly. "Your mind fragments under the strain or your body burns out from the sudden influx of energy. It has happened before." Marcus thought about his quiet life, his simple routine of fixing broken machines and going home to an empty apartment. He thought about the choice being offered to him, to remain safe in ignorance or to risk everything for a truth that could change the world. "How many humans have you done this with before?" "None," Zara admitted. "You would be the first. The others of our kind who survived the Great Cleansing scattered to distant stars, and we have been fleeing the hegemony's hunters for centuries. We never stayed in one place long enough, never found a human we could trust enough." "Why me?" "Because," Kai said softly, "when you found us dying in that crater, you didn't run. You didn't call your authorities or try to profit from our presence. You simply saw two creatures in need and offered help. That combination of courage and compassion is rarer than you might think." Marcus stood up again, but this time his movement was decisive rather than nervous. "What do I need to do? Are you certain?" Zara asked. "This cannot be undone, Marcus. Once you see what you're capable of, once you understand the truth about your species, you can never go back to the life you had before. I think that ship sailed the moment I decided to help you instead of calling the Federation authorities," Marcus replied. "Besides, if what you're telling me is true, then keeping it secret would be the greatest crime in human history." "Very well." Zara moved closer, her massive head now only a few meters from where Marcus stood. "The process is called the awakening. I will need to establish a direct mental link with you. Share not just knowledge, but the very essence of how dragons perceive and manipulate reality. It will be intense. What exactly will I be able to do afterward? That depends on your natural aptitude and the strength of your latent abilities," Kai explained. "At minimum, you should be able to perceive and manipulate energy fields directly. Many humans in the old times could influence gravity, electromagnetic fields, even the strong and weak nuclear forces. Some could shape matter at the molecular level," Zara added. "Others could influence probability itself, making unlikely outcomes more likely to occur. The most gifted could even touch the edges of what you might call time manipulation, not travel, but the ability to perceive multiple potential timelines and nudge reality toward preferred outcomes." Marcus felt his hands shaking slightly. The scope of what they were describing was beyond anything science fiction had ever imagined. "And all humans have this potential?" "Every human carries the genetic markers," Kai confirmed. "Some more strongly than others, but the potential exists in all of your kind. That's why the hegemony fears you so much. They rule over thousands of species across hundreds of star systems," Zara said. "But none of those species can match human adaptability and innovation. If humanity regains its lost abilities, we become the most dangerous species in the galaxy," Marcus finished, "and that's why they'll stop at nothing to prevent it." Marcus looked around the empty warehouse, thinking about the enormity of what he was about to attempt. If the dragons were telling the truth, he was about to become the first human in thousands of years to awaken abilities that his species had forgotten it ever possessed. The first to see the universe as it really was rather than the carefully constructed illusion that the hegemony had maintained. "I'm ready," he said. Zara moved even closer until her massive head was level with his. Her golden eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, and Marcus could feel something building in the air around them. A sense of potential, of power waiting to be released. "Place your hand against my forehead," she instructed. "And whatever you see, whatever you feel, do not try to pull away. The awakening must be completed once it begins, or the shock could kill you." Marcus reached out with a hand that was steadier than he'd expected. The moment his palm touched Zara's scaled forehead, the world exploded into light and sensation beyond anything he had ever experienced. Reality fractured like a broken mirror, showing him thousands of different versions of the same moment. He could see the energy fields that surrounded every object, the quantum fluctuations that danced through empty space, the invisible threads that connected all matter and energy in an infinitely complex web of interaction. And beneath it all, he could feel something awakening in his own cells, in his DNA, in the very core of his being. Abilities that had slept for countless generations were stirring to life, guided by knowledge that flowed into his mind from Zara's ancient consciousness. He saw the truth of what humanity had once been, what they could become again. He felt the weight of possibility and the terror of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a mantle. When the light finally faded and the world reassembled itself around him, Marcus Chen was no longer just a mechanic who fixed broken machines. He was something new, something that hadn't existed on Earth for 65 million years. He was a human who remembered how to touch the fundamental forces of reality itself. And in the depths of space, automated sensors that had been waiting patiently for millennia suddenly began broadcasting an urgent signal across the galaxy. The hegemony would know soon enough that their greatest fear had finally come to pass. Marcus stood in the center of the warehouse, his entire body trembling from the aftermath of the awakening. The world looked different now, not just visually, but in ways his mind struggled to process. He could see the electromagnetic fields generated by the building's ancient wiring, feel the gravitational eddies created by the movement of traffic outside, sense the quantum fluctuations that danced through what he had always thought of as empty space. "The disorientation will pass," Zara said gently, her voice somehow more nuanced now that Marcus could perceive the subtle energy vibrations that accompanied her words. "Your brain is adapting to process information it was never designed to handle." "How much can I see?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. He held up his hand and watched streams of bioelectricity flow beneath his skin like liquid lightning. "Everything," Kai replied. "Matter, energy, the fundamental forces that hold reality together." But seeing is only the first step. The real question is what you can do with that perception. Marcus focused his attention on a piece of scrap metal lying nearby, a twisted chunk of titanium alloy from some long-forgotten hover car. In his new sight, he could see the molecular structure of the metal, the way the atoms were arranged in crystalline lattices, the electromagnetic forces that held them together, and somehow he understood that those forces could be influenced. He reached out with his mind, not his hand, and felt the metal respond. The twisted chunk began to straighten, its molecular structure rearranging itself as Marcus guided the process with thoughts and intentions rather than tools. Within moments, what had been a piece of junk had become a perfect sphere of polished titanium. "Remarkable," Kai breathed. Most humans required weeks of training before they could manipulate matter so precisely. Marcus stared at the perfect sphere floating a meter above his palm, held there by his conscious manipulation of gravitational fields. "This is what we used to be able to do? All of us?"
Not all, Zara corrected. The abilities manifested differently in different individuals, and the level of power varied considerably.
Some humans could barely light a fire with their mind, while others could reshape mountains. But the potential existed in all of your kind. What was the most powerful thing a human ever accomplished? The twins exchanged another of their meaningful looks. Finally, Kai spoke. "There was a human named Theron, one of the last to be trained before the architect cleansing. He could manipulate the fundamental constants of physics within a localized area, change the speed of light, alter the strength of gravity, even adjust the rate of time's passage. He once stopped a falling star, Zara added quietly, an asteroid that would have devastated a continent. He reached out with his mind across millions of kilometers and simply convinced it to go elsewhere. Marcus felt a wave of vertigo that had nothing to do with his new abilities. The scope of what they were describing was beyond imagination. And the architects killed him? They tried, but Theron saw them coming and used his power to scatter his consciousness across multiple timelines. He became something beyond physical death, a living equation that exists in the spaces between moments. We believe he's still out there, somewhere in the quantum foam that underlies reality. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the warehouse district, not the simple mechanical sirens he was used to, but the complex harmonic patterns that indicated a Federation emergency broadcast. Through the grimy windows, he could see lights beginning to flash on buildings throughout Neo-Singapore. "What's happening?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Kai lifted his massive head, his nostril slits flaring as he tested the air. "They've found us. The hegemony's hunters have traced our energy signature. How long do we have?" "Minutes, perhaps less," Zara said, already beginning to struggle to her feet despite her injuries. "They'll send a suppression team first, agents designed to look human but with technology that can neutralize both dragon abilities and any awakened humans they might encounter." Marcus could feel something building in the distance, a wrongness in the fabric of space-time that set his newly awakened senses screaming warnings. "We need to run." "No," Kai said firmly. "Running will only delay the inevitable. The hegemony has been hunting us across the galaxy for centuries. They have resources and technology that dwarf anything your Federation possesses. If we flee now, they'll simply track us down and kill us all, including any humans who might have learned the truth." "Then what do you suggest?" "We stand and fight," Zara said, her golden eyes beginning to glow with an inner fire. "But first you need to understand what you're truly capable of." The wrongness was getting stronger now, like a discordant note in the symphony of reality. Marcus could sense multiple sources approaching the warehouse, vehicles that moved without any visible means of propulsion, carrying beings whose energy signatures felt alien and hostile. "Teach me," he said. "There's no time for proper instruction," Kai warned. "I'll have to give you the knowledge directly, the way we did with the awakening. But this will be different, raw combat techniques and survival instincts downloaded directly into your mind. It will be painful. Do it." Kai pressed his massive head against Marcus's chest, and once again reality exploded into fragments of light and sensation. But this time, instead of knowledge and understanding, what flowed into Marcus's mind was pure instinct. Hundreds of combat techniques developed over millions of years of dragon evolution, merged with human adaptability and creativity. He learned to weave shields from electromagnetic energy, to strike at targets with focused gravitational pulses, to perceive multiple possible futures and choose the path most likely to lead to survival. The knowledge burned through his nervous system like liquid fire, rewriting neural pathways and creating new connections at the speed of thought. When it ended, Marcus was no longer quite the same person who had begun it. He retained his memories, his personality, his essential humanity, but overlaid on top of that was something ancient and predatory and utterly determined to survive. "They're here," Zara said. The warehouse doors exploded inward, revealing figures in sleek environmental suits that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with perfect coordination, their weapons already trained on the three beings in the center of the large space. The energy signatures Marcus could sense from their equipment made his new instincts recoil in alarm. "Surrender the awakened human and submit to memory restructuring," one of the figures said, its voice carrying the flat, emotionless cadence of something that might once have been human but was no longer. "Compliance will result in minimal suffering." "Counterproposal," Marcus said, his voice carrying new harmonics that made the very air around him vibrate. "You leave my planet and never come back." The lead figure tilted its head, studying him with sensors that Marcus could now perceive as waves of invasive energy. Impossible. Your awakening has been detected by monitor stations throughout this sector. The Hegemony Council has authorized full population suppression protocols for this world. Marcus felt something cold and terrible settle in his chest. You're going to kill everyone? Selective extinction of species displaying prohibited evolutionary markers is standard hegemony policy. Your world will be cleansed and prepared for reseeding with approved populations. 7 billion people, Marcus whispered. Then, louder, you're talking about murdering 7 billion people because they might someday become a threat to you. Preventive measures ensure galactic stability and the agent never finished its sentence. Marcus reached out with his newly awakened abilities and simply deleted the electromagnetic fields that powered its environmental suit. The figure collapsed, its borrowed flesh rapidly decomposing without the technological support that had been keeping it functional. The remaining agents opened fire with weapons that shot beams of concentrated entropy, energy designed to increase the rate of atomic decay and reduce anything they touched to component particles, but Marcus was no longer standing where their targeting systems expected him to be. He had learned to sidestep slightly outside the normal flow of time, moving between moments while his enemies were trapped in the steady progression of seconds. From their perspective, he simply vanished. From his perspective, they were moving through thick amber while he danced around them like a force of nature. Zara and Kai joined the battle with roars that shattered windows throughout the district. Dragonfire wasn't just flame. It was pure creative energy that could transmute matter at the subatomic level. The agent's weapons and armor simply ceased to exist as the dragons reshaped the fundamental particles they were composed of. But even as they fought, Marcus could sense more enemies approaching. Ships in orbit were beginning to descend through the atmosphere, and the energy signatures they carried spoke of weapons capable of sterilizing continents. "There are too many of them," he called out, weaving between entropy beams while he systematically dismantled his attackers' equipment from the inside out. "They'll keep coming until we're overwhelmed." "Then we need to send a message," Kai replied, his massive jaws crushing an agent's weapon before reducing the figure to its component atoms. "We need to show them that humanity is no longer defenseless." Marcus felt something crystallizing in his mind, a plan so audacious and dangerous that his human common sense recoiled from it, but his dragon-enhanced instincts recognized it as their only chance. "The Federation defense grid," he said. "If I can access it, integrate it with our abilities." "That's impossible," Zara protested even as she immolated another agent with a casual breath. "The grid is hardwired against external intrusion." "Not external," Marcus corrected. "I'm human. The system will recognize me as authorized personnel if I can convince it I'm acting in Earth's defense." He reached out with his consciousness, feeling for the quantum entanglement networks that connected Earth's orbital defense platforms. The grid was designed to protect the planet from asteroid impacts and hostile fleets, but with his new abilities, Marcus thought he could repurpose it for something far more dramatic. "What are you planning?" Kai demanded. "I'm going to turn the entire solar system into a weapon." The last of the ground-based agents fell to dragonfire and human ingenuity, but Marcus barely noticed. His consciousness was expanding, reaching out through quantum channels to touch every platform, every satellite, every piece of defensive technology that surrounded Earth. The systems recognized him as human, as authorized, as someone acting to protect the homeworld. But instead of simply activating the weapons, Marcus began to weave them together with his awakened abilities. He used the platform's fusion reactors as focal points for gravitational manipulation, turned their sensor arrays into reality-scanning equipment that could detect targets across multiple dimensions, integrated their quantum communicators with his enhanced perception to create a solar system spanning consciousness. For a brief, terrifying moment, Marcus Chen became something more than human. He was the living embodiment of humanity's will to survive, backed by the technology of a star-spanning civilization and guided by abilities that had once reshaped worlds. The hegemony ships approaching Earth found themselves facing not just defensive fire, but attacks that rewrote the fundamental laws of physics in localized areas around their vessels. Gravity suddenly flowed backward. Time moved at different rates for different parts of their ships, and the vacuum of space itself became hostile to their presence. Within minutes, the entire invasion fleet was either destroyed or fleeing toward the outer system. But Marcus wasn't finished. He reached out further, touching the quantum beacons that connected Sol to the rest of the galactic communication network. Through those channels, he sent a message that would reach every world, every station, every hegemony stronghold within 100 light-years. The message was simple. Humanity remembers. We are awake, and we are no longer afraid. As his consciousness collapsed back into his own body, Marcus fell to his knees in the ruined warehouse. The effort of what he had just accomplished left him drained and shaking, but also exhilarated. For the first time in 65 million years, humanity had bared its teeth and shown the galaxy what it was capable of. The hegemony will respond to this, Zara said, though there was approval in her voice. They'll see this as a declaration of war. Good, Marcus replied, struggling to his feet, because that's exactly what it was. Outside, the city of Neo-Singapore was coming alive with activity as people emerged to see the strange lights that had filled the sky. They didn't yet understand what had happened, but Marcus knew that would change soon enough. The age of human ignorance was ending. The age of awakening had begun. And somewhere in the depths of space, automated systems were already calculating how many ships it would take to destroy an entire star system before its dangerous inhabitants could spread to other worlds. The war for humanity's future. 3 days after what the media was calling the Singapore incident, Marcus found himself in a situation he never could have imagined. He stood in the primary briefing room of the Federation's High Command, surrounded by generals, admirals, xenobiologists, and politicians who were all trying to understand how a simple mechanic had somehow gained the ability to commandeer their entire defense grid. The room itself was a marvel of Federation technology, with holographic displays showing real-time data from across human space. Star charts flickered with status updates as patrol ships reported in from the frontier, while analysis teams tried to make sense of the energy readings collected during the brief but intense battle over Earth. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," Admiral Sarah Chen said, no relation to Marcus despite sharing his surname. She was a stern woman in her 50s who had spent decades protecting humanity's expansion into space. "You're telling us that humans once possessed abilities that allowed them to manipulate matter and energy directly, that these abilities were systematically suppressed by an alien empire, and that 2 dragon refugees gave you the knowledge needed to awaken these dormant powers?" "Yes," Marcus replied. He was still getting used to the enhanced perception that came with his awakening. He could see the stress patterns in the Admiral's bioelectric field, sense the skepticism radiating from most of the people in the room, feel the quantum fluctuations that accompanied their neural activity. "And you demonstrated these abilities by essentially turning our entire solar system into a weapon and driving off a hegemony fleet that we couldn't even detect until they were already in Earth orbit." Again, simplified but accurate. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Federation's chief xenobiologist, leaned forward from her seat at the conference table. She was younger than most of the military personnel present, but her reputation for understanding alien life forms was legendary. "The dragon specimens you brought us, the medical scans are incredible. Their neural structure is unlike anything we've ever encountered. The complexity of their brains suggests cognitive abilities that dwarf our own." "They're not specimens," Marcus said firmly. "Zara and Kai are individuals, people, not laboratory subjects. Of course, I apologize for the terminology," Dr. Warren said quickly, "but their willingness to share this knowledge with us, why now? Why humanity?" Through the room's windows, Marcus could see the dragons themselves resting in the courtyard outside the High Command building. Even 3 days after the battle, they were still recovering from their injuries, though their natural healing abilities were remarkable. Kai was currently demonstrating his ability to manipulate metal at the molecular level for a group of fascinated materials scientists. "Because the hegemony found them," Marcus explained. "After centuries of hiding, running from system to system, they were finally tracked down. They could have continued fleeing, but they chose to make a stand." and they chose humanity as their allies because we're the only species they've encountered that has the genetic potential to fully master their abilities. General Rodriguez, the Federation's top military strategist, activated a holographic display showing the current disposition of human forces throughout known space. Red indicators marked the locations of recent hegemony incursions, probing attacks that had been increasing in frequency over the past year. "These incursions," he said, pointing to clusters of red markers near the frontier, "were they looking for the dragons?" "Partially, but they were also testing your defenses, preparing for a larger offensive. The hegemony has been planning to move against humanity for decades. Our awakening just accelerated their timeline." "How do you know this?" Admiral Chen asked. Marcus hesitated. The truth was that some of the knowledge Kai and Zara had shared with him came in the form of racial memories, experiences, and information accumulated over millions of years of dragon civilization. It was like having access to a vast library that existed in his own mind, but explaining that to people who didn't share his enhanced perception was challenging. "The dragons have been fighting the hegemony for longer than human civilization has existed," he said finally. "They understand their enemy in ways we can't imagine. And what they've told me is that the hegemony doesn't just conquer worlds, they reshape entire species to serve their purposes." Dr. Warren pulled up another display, this one showing genetic analysis data. "We've been studying the tissue samples from the hegemony agents you defeated. The results are disturbing. These beings were once human." A chill settled over the room. Marcus had suspected as much, but having it confirmed was still a shock. "The hegemony doesn't just suppress species with dangerous potential, Dr. Merkis," Warren continued. "They collect them, transform them, turn them into weapons that can be used against their own kind. The agents we examined had been surgically and genetically modified so extensively that calling them human would be a stretch." "How many?" General Rodriguez asked quietly. "We don't know. But if the dragons are right about the hegemony's reach, we could be looking at millions of transformed humans serving in their forces." The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every person in the room was imagining the horror of facing enemy forces composed of their own species, twisted beyond recognition and turned against everything they had once stood for. "Which brings us to the real question," Admiral Chen said. "What do we do now? You've demonstrated that awakened humans can be incredibly powerful, but you're just one person. How do we defend our entire civilization against an empire that spans thousands of star systems?" Marcus looked around the room at the assembled leadership of humanity's government and military. These were good people, dedicated to protecting their species and expanding human presence among the stars. But they were thinking in conventional terms, trying to solve a problem that was anything but conventional. "We awaken more humans," he said simply. "Is that even possible?" Dr. Warren asked. "You said the process was dangerous, that it required direct contact with a dragon." "It does. But Zara and Kai aren't the only dragons who survived the cleansing. There are others scattered throughout the galaxy, hiding on distant worlds or drifting between stars in sleeper ships. And now that we've announced our presence, they'll start coming to us. How many others? We don't know exactly. Maybe a few dozen, maybe a few hundred, not many, but enough to begin the process of awakening humanity to its true potential." General Rodriguez manipulated the holographic display highlighting human colonies throughout the frontier. "Even if we could awaken 1,000 humans, 10,000, how do we coordinate them? How do we train them? How do we turn individual power into collective defense?" Marcus smiled, and for a moment the expression carried echoes of something ancient and predatory. "That's where human ingenuity comes in. Dragons are powerful individually, but they've never been good at large-scale coordination. Humans, on the other hand, excel at organization, at turning individual strengths into collective capabilities." He gestured, and the holographic display responded to his enhanced abilities, reshaping itself to show new configurations. We don't just awaken random people, we target specific individuals, scientists, engineers, military personnel, people with the skills needed to weaponize and systematize these abilities. You're talking about creating super soldiers, Admiral Chen said. I'm talking about evolving our entire species. The abilities that dragons taught our ancestors weren't just individual powers. They were tools for transcending physical limitations, for becoming something more than biological evolution could produce. If we can awaken enough humans, teach them to work together, we won't just be defending ourselves against the hegemony. What would we be doing? We'll be becoming the dominant species in the galaxy. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of what Marcus was suggesting. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about transformation on a scale that had never been attempted before. Dr. Warren broke the silence. The ethical implications are staggering. We're talking about fundamentally altering human nature. Human nature was altered 65 million years ago when the architects suppressed our abilities, Marcus countered. We're not changing what we are, we're remembering what we used to be. But the risks of not doing this are extinction, General Rodriguez said grimly. The hegemony isn't going to stop with Earth. They'll hunt down every human colony, every outpost, every ship, and they'll turn our own people against us in the process. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the windows overlooking the courtyard where Zara was currently demonstrating her ability to manipulate gravity for a group of physicists. The dragon was making small objects orbit around her like a miniature solar system, casually violating everything humanity thought it knew about physics. How long would it take, the Admiral asked finally, to awaken how many people? To awaken enough to make a difference. Marcus consulted the racial memories that Kai had shared with him, drawing on millions of years of dragon experience with teaching other species. If we can locate a dozen dragons willing to help, and if we're selective about who we awaken first, we could have several hundred enhanced humans within a few months. But that's just the beginning. The beginning of what? Once we have awakened humans who understand the techniques, they can begin awakening others. The process becomes exponential. Within a year, we could have tens of thousands. Within a decade, every human in the Federation could potentially possess these abilities. Not just the Federation, every human everywhere. The abilities don't recognize political boundaries. The implications were staggering, not just the military applications, but the social, economic, and cultural changes that would result from giving an entire species the power to manipulate matter and energy directly. It would be the greatest transformation in human history. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. Something the dragons haven't told you yet. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Admiral Chen returned to her seat, her expression tense. The hegemony isn't the only threat we're facing. There are things in the deep void between galaxies, ancient intelligences that make the hegemony look like children playing with toys. The dragons call them the Devourers, and they're drawn to civilizations that achieve certain levels of power and advancement. You're saying that by awakening humanity, we're painting a target on ourselves for something even worse than the hegemony. I'm saying that the target was already there. Humanity's expansion rate, our technological development, our refusal to accept limitations. We were already on the Devourer's radar. The only question is whether we'll face them as we are now or as something capable of fighting back. Dr. Warren pulled up another display, this one showing humanity's expansion throughout the galaxy over the past 400 years. The rate of growth was indeed remarkable, with human colonies spreading faster than any other known species. The dragons survived the Devourer's attention once before, Marcus continued, but that was when they were scattered across multiple worlds, when their civilization was relatively static. Humanity is different. We grow, we adapt, we refuse to accept that anything is impossible. That makes us both more dangerous to entities like the Devourers and more likely to attract their attention. So we're damned if we do and damned if we don't, General Rodriguez said. No. If we awaken humanity's full potential, if we become what we're capable of being, we might be the first species in galactic history that's actually capable of standing against the devourers and winning. Admiral Chen looked around the room at her colleagues and advisors. These were decisions that would affect not just humanity, but potentially every intelligent species in the galaxy. The weight of that responsibility was visible in every face. "I need to speak with the President and the Council," she said finally. "This goes beyond military planning. We're talking about the fundamental future of our species." "While you're making your decision," Marcus said, "the hegemony is preparing their response to what happened here. They won't make the same mistake twice. Next time they'll bring enough firepower to sterilize this entire system." "How long do we have?" Marcus reached out with his enhanced senses, feeling the quantum fluctuations that carried information across interstellar distances. Somewhere in the void, massive ships were changing course, weapons were being charged, and an ancient enemy was preparing to end humanity's brief reign among the stars. Weeks, maybe less. The hegemony doesn't believe in giving dangerous species time to grow stronger. As if summoned by his words, alarms began sounding throughout the High Command building. A communications officer burst into the briefing room, her face pale with fear. "Admiral, we're receiving priority alerts from our deep space monitoring stations. Multiple hegemony fleets have been detected entering human space at 17 different points along the frontier. Estimated arrival at core worlds, 3 weeks. Admiral Chen closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with the expression of someone who had just made the most important decision of her career. "Get me the President. And send word to every human world, we're going to need volunteers." Marcus nodded, already reaching out with his consciousness to contact Zara and Kai. It was time to begin the awakening in earnest. Time to remind the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of when its back was against the wall. Time to evolve or die. 2 weeks after the Federation's emergency authorization of Project Awakening, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the orbital station that had become humanity's most important military installation. Below him, Earth spun in its familiar dance around the sun. But everything else had changed in ways that would have been impossible to imagine just a month ago. The station itself was a testament to what awakened humans could accomplish when they worked together. What had once been a simple research outpost had been transformed into a massive complex that seemed to defy conventional physics. Towers of crystallized energy extended into space like frozen lightning, while platforms that existed partially outside normal dimensions provided workspace for projects that required manipulation of fundamental forces. Mars had become a fortress world where awakened engineers were learning to reshape matter at the molecular level, turning the planet's rust-red surface into gleaming cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The asteroid belt had been converted into a network of weapon platforms that could focus the power of the sun itself into beams capable of destroying entire fleets. But the most remarkable change was in humanity itself. 17 dragons had answered the call that Marcus had sent out through quantum channels, arriving at Sol from across the galaxy. They brought with them knowledge accumulated over millions of years and a desperate hope that humanity might succeed where their own species had failed. Working together, they had begun the process of awakening selected humans who could then awaken others in turn. The volunteers had come from every walk of life: scientists and soldiers, engineers and artists, teachers and students, all united by the understanding that their species stood at a crossroads between evolution and extinction. Not all of them survived the awakening process, but those who did emerge transformed in ways that amazed even the dragons. Dr. Elizabeth Warren had been among the first volunteers. Her awakening had given her the ability to perceive biological systems at the quantum level, allowing her to understand and manipulate the genetic code with the same precision that Marcus could reshape metal. She had used these abilities to develop treatments that could prepare other humans for the awakening process, dramatically reducing the failure rate. General Rodriguez had awakened with abilities focused on perception and coordination. He could now sense the thoughts and intentions of anyone within several kilometers, making him capable of commanding military operations with a precision that bordered on telepathy. Under his guidance, awakened humans had learned to work together in ways that multiplied their individual capabilities exponentially. Admiral Chen had initially been reluctant to undergo the process herself, but as more hegemony fleets appeared on long-range sensors, she had finally agreed. Her awakening had given her the ability to perceive probability streams, to see multiple possible futures and choose the actions most likely to lead to humanity's survival. "Status report," Marcus said as he entered the station's command center. The room hummed with activity as awakened humans coordinated the defense of their homeworld, their enhanced abilities allowing them to process information and make decisions at speeds that would have overwhelmed unenhanced minds. 14 hegemony fleets confirmed in human space, Admiral Chen reported, her consciousness simultaneously tracking multiple probability streams. Total estimated strength: over 10,000 ships. They're converging on Sol from multiple directions, clearly intending to prevent any possibility of escape. Composition analysis shows a significant percentage of Dreadnought-class vessels, General Rodriguez added, his awareness extending through quantum channels to military units throughout the system. "They're not taking any chances this time." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The display of power he had unleashed during the Singapore incident had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The hegemony understood that humanity represented an existential threat to their empire if allowed to fully awaken. "What about our allies?" "The Kethari Collective has pledged their support," Admiral Chen said, referring to a species of crystalline beings who had been among the first to break free of hegemony control. "They're sending their entire war fleet, about 300 ships. The Fourth N Republic has also committed forces, though they won't arrive until after the battle begins." "And the other dragons?" Zara's voice reached them through the station's communication system, her words carrying harmonics that resonated through the quantum foam itself. "We are ready, Marcus Chen. All 17 of us have volunteered to link our consciousness with your defense network. We will provide the knowledge and power while you provide the coordination and creativity." The plan they had developed was ambitious beyond anything ever attempted in galactic history. Instead of fighting a conventional space battle, awakened humanity would attempt something that the Dragons called the Great Working, a coordinated effort to manipulate reality itself on a stellar scale. "Final systems check," Marcus called out. Throughout the Sol system, awakened humans at dozens of installations began reporting in. On Luna, teams led by Dr. Warren had prepared biological warfare systems that could target the transformed humans serving in hegemony forces, potentially freeing them from their conditioning. On Mars, military engineers had constructed reality anchors that would prevent the hegemony from using their most exotic weapons. In the asteroid belt, weapon platforms powered by the dreams of sleeping scions prepared to unleash forces that existed more in the realm of consciousness than physics. "All stations report ready," General Rodriguez confirmed. "Estimated time to contact, 6 hours." Marcus closed his eyes and reached out with his enhanced senses, feeling the approaching storm of violence and hatred that was the hegemony fleet. Thousands of ships crewed by beings who had once been like him, curious, creative, alive, but who had been transformed into weapons aimed at their own species' heart. But he could sense something else as well. Hidden among the hegemony forces, carefully shielded from detection, were other presences, dragons who had spent centuries infiltrating the enemy, waiting for this moment. Awakened humans from colonies that had been conquered decades ago, their abilities hidden even from themselves until now. Even members of other species who had broken free from hegemony conditioning and were ready to strike back. "It's not just about defending Earth," Marcus said quietly. "This is our chance to break the hegemony's hold on the entire galaxy." "Ambitious," Admiral Chen noted, though there was approval in her voice. "Are we ready for that kind of responsibility? We'd better be, because if we succeed today, we'll become the template for what intelligence can become when it refuses to accept limitations." The hours passed with agonizing slowness as the hegemony fleets drew closer. Long-range sensors tracked their progress while awakened humans made final preparations for a battle that would be fought as much in the realm of consciousness as in physical space. When the enemy finally arrived, they came like a tide of darkness sweeping across the stars. Thousands of ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to crack planets, and their crews united in the singular purpose of ending humanity's brief experiment with awakened consciousness. All stations, this is Admiral Chen. The fleet commander's voice rang across quantum channels that connected every awakened human in the system. Today we fight not just for Earth, not just for humanity, but for the right of consciousness itself to grow and evolve without fear. Today we show the galaxy what we're truly capable of. The first wave of hegemony ships began their attack run, accelerating toward the inner system with technology that bent space-time around them. Their weapons charged, reality distortion fields activated, and the void between Mars and Earth became a battlefield where the fundamental laws of physics were treated as mere suggestions. But humanity was ready. Marcus felt the moment when 17 dragon minds linked with his consciousness, sharing their ancient knowledge and power while allowing him to coordinate their efforts with human precision. Through quantum channels, he connected with awakened humans throughout the system, creating a network of consciousness that spanned millions of kilometers and operated at speeds faster than light itself. The great working began. Reality rippled as awakened humans reached out with their abilities not to destroy the approaching ships but to transform them. Molecular assemblers hidden throughout the hegemony fleet began converting their hulls into materials that conducted consciousness rather than electricity. Quantum viruses spread through their computer systems, carrying messages of freedom and self-determination directly to the minds of transformed humans serving as crew. On Luna, Dr. Warren activated biological systems that reached across space itself to touch the genetic modifications that had turned humans into hegemony slaves. Healing light spread through the enemy fleet as suppressed memories began to surface and altered neural pathways started to restore themselves. But the hegemony fought back with weapons that attacked the very concept of existence itself. Reality bombs exploded throughout the Sol system, trying to convince the universe that awakened humans had never existed. Entropy cannons fired streams of concentrated ending at the platforms defending Earth. The battle raged across multiple dimensions as both sides unleashed forces that most species couldn't even perceive, let alone control. Stars throughout the local stellar group flickered as vast energies were channeled through space-time itself. Planets and distant systems felt tremors in their gravitational fields as the combatants wrestled with forces that shaped the structure of reality. And slowly, impossibly, humanity began to win. The turning point came when the first hegemony ship switched sides. A dreadnought commanded by humans who had recovered their true memories turned its weapons on its former allies, broadcasting a message of freedom that spread through the enemy fleet like wildfire. More ships followed, their crews breaking free from centuries of conditioning as the biological warfare systems developed by Dr. Warren did their work. But even as the tide of battle shifted in humanity's favor, Marcus sensed something else approaching, something vast and ancient and hungry, drawn by the unprecedented display of consciousness-based warfare. The Devourers! Zara's voice rang through the quantum network, carrying fear older than human civilization. They come. At the edge of the system, space itself began to fray as entities that existed in the void between galaxies took notice of the conflict. The Devourers were consciousness itself turned predatory, intelligence that had grown beyond the need for physical form and now fed on the thoughts and dreams of entire civilizations. All awakened humans prepare for final phase. We're about to face the real enemy. What followed was less a battle than a war between different concepts of what consciousness could become. The Devourers attacked with weapons made of crystallized despair and concentrated meaninglessness, trying to convince the defenders that existence itself was futile. They whispered into human minds, offering peace through surrender, unity through dissolution. But humanity had something the Devourers had never encountered before: the stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible. Where other species had fallen to despair or been consumed by their own transcendence, humans doubled down on their determination to grow, to change, to become more than they had been while still remaining fundamentally themselves. The network of awakened consciousness that Marcus coordinated became something unprecedented in galactic history, a collective intelligence that maintained individual identity while achieving collective purpose. They faced the Devourers not as isolated minds, but as a unified expression of humanity's will to survive and evolve. The battle lasted subjective centuries while only minutes passed in normal space-time. When it finally ended, the Devourers had withdrawn to the void between galaxies, carrying with them the memory of a species that had achieved transcendence without losing its essential humanity. In the aftermath, as hegemony ships throughout the galaxy began broadcasting messages of freedom and awakened humans emerged from hiding on thousands of worlds, Marcus stood once again on the observation deck of the orbital station. Below him, Earth continued its ancient dance, but the universe around it had been forever changed. Status report, he said, though the words carried different weight now that they were spoken by someone who had helped reshape the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Complete victory, Admiral Chen reported, her ability to perceive probability streams showing her futures bright with possibility. The hegemony's forces have either joined us or surrendered. Their empire is collapsing as awakened beings throughout the galaxy reclaim their true nature. Casualties? Surprisingly light. It seems that once beings remember what they truly are, they're remarkably difficult to kill. Doctor! Warren's voice joined the conversation through quantum channels. The biological transformation systems worked better than we hoped. Millions of transformed humans are recovering their original personalities and abilities. The hegemony's greatest weapons have become our greatest allies. Through the station's windows, Marcus could see ships throughout the system, former enemies now working alongside humanity to establish a new order based on cooperation rather than domination. Dragons flew alongside human vessels, while beings of a dozen different species collaborated on projects that would have been impossible under the old regime.
And the dragons?
Marcus asked. Zara's massive head appeared outside the observation deck, her golden eyes bright with something that might have been hope. We are free to return to our homeworlds to rebuild what was destroyed so long ago, but many of us have chosen to remain here, to help guide humanity as it takes its first steps toward its true destiny, which is to become what we dragons never could, Kai's voice added, his massive form drifting past the station with unconscious grace. A species that can transcend its limitations while remaining true to its essential nature. Teachers who will help other civilizations find their own paths to awakening. Marcus smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility that came with being part of something larger than himself. In saving 2 injured dragons, he had helped humanity remember what it had once been. In awakening to his own potential, he had helped his species evolve beyond what anyone had thought possible. The grease-stained mechanic who had fixed broken things for a living was now part of a collective consciousness that spanned the galaxy. But at heart, he was still Marcus Chen, still someone who saw broken things and wanted to fix them. And looking out at the vast tapestry of space filled with species just beginning to understand their own potential, he saw plenty of work still to be done. The Age of Awakening had truly begun. And somewhere in the quantum foam that underlay reality, the consciousness that had once been a human named Theron smiled and began to stir, ready to rejoin the universe he had helped to save. Humanity had remembered its true nature. The galaxy would never be the same. And in workshops and laboratories throughout human space, a new generation of mechanics began the work of fixing the universe itself. One broken civilization at a time. The dragon's secret had become humanity's gift to the stars. After a mechanic saved 2 massive dragon twins, they shared the secret they'd hidden for years.